Okay, so we're diving into Blood Brothers, and you've given me a ton of notes and slides.
It seems like you're really interested in more than just the play itself, right? You want to understand like the whole world that it inhabits,
Yeah.
that gritty reality of like 1960s Liverpool.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about Blood Brothers is how Willie Russell uses this very, very specific time
Hmm.
and place to explore these kind of really universal themes.
Right.
Um, he's weaving this tale of social class and fate
Hmm.
and kind of like the weight of our environment, themes that resonate with everybody regardless
Yeah.
of, when or where they lived.
It's so true. And he does it through this just incredibly dramatic premise, right?
Yeah.
Twin brothers separated at birth.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like a social experiment unfolding on stage, wouldn't you say?
precisely. Yeah, I mean, the separation allows Russell to kind of tackle that age-old nature versus nurture
Hmm.
debate head on. And he
Mhm.
seems to be suggesting that, you know,
Yeah.
it's not just our genes that determine
Right.
our path in life, right? It's the circumstances we're born into, our upbringing, our social class. Even
Yeah.
I think he even references postcodes at one point.
Wow.
It's like he's saying, okay, here are two genetically identical individuals. Let's see how differently their lives unfold based on the hand that they're dealt.
It's like a giant game of what if.
Right.
Right? Like, what if we take these two identical beings and put them in completely different environments?
Yeah.
How do their lives unfold? And from what I'm gathering, like Liverpool in the 50s, 60s, and 70s,
Yeah.
with its stark contrast and like rapid changes, it becomes like a character in itself.
Absolutely. And Blood Brothers does paint this very, very vivid picture of Liverpool
Yeah.
during this time. And Liverpool, once this bustling port city, was really, really hit hard by the recession.
Right.
So you can imagine working class families just struggling to make ends meet,
Hmm.
crammed into these really cramped council houses, their livelihoods all tied to these
Right.
kind of traditional industries like shipbuilding and coal mining that were struggling.
It's like their whole identity was tied to
Oh, cool.
this
Yeah.
one particular industry.
And Russell even uses dialogue to capture this anxiety at the time.
Yeah.
So there are points where Mr. Lyons
Okay.
is talking about, the shrinking pound and the rising price of oil. And these are things that we see
It's so real.
playing out in the real world.
Yeah.
They're impacting these characters very, very directly.
It's easy to forget that those industries weren't just jobs for people.
Right.
It was the lifeblood of like entire communities.
Yeah.
Generations of families relied on a single factory or shipyard.
Absolutely.
So when those vanished, it wasn't just individual livelihoods that crumbled.
Yeah,
It was an entire way of life.
precisely.
And on the flip side, right, you had these middle-class families like the Lyonses
Yep.
residing in more affluent areas, enjoying better schools,
Yeah.
a wider array of opportunities. And the play's not shying away from that contrast.
It doesn't at all.
Right.
It really highlights these inequalities.
And you can't ignore the impact of Thatcher coming into power, right, in 79.
Right?
I mean, her policies led to the closure of a lot of these industries, too. So it's like
Yeah.
accelerating the decline of these communities even further.
Yeah. And it kind of emphasizes how these personal stories that we're seeing play out on stage,
Right.
they don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're happening against this much
It's all connected.
larger historical and political backdrop. Exactly.
Yeah, and amidst all of this social economic upheaval,
Yeah.
you've got Liverpool City Council trying to alleviate the overcrowding in these working class areas.
Yeah.
So they start relocating families to these newly built new towns like Skelmersdale.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be this fresh start, a chance for a better life.
Right.
And you see that in Mrs. Johnstone's character, right?
Sure.
She's initially ecstatic about the move.
Yeah.
She sings that song, Bright New Day.
Right.
And you can just feel her hope,
Yeah.
her belief that somehow this change in scenery will like erase the class lines.
But that's where I think the play's complexity really shines through,
Okay.
because it challenges this notion that a change in geography will automatically translate into a change
Right.
in social reality.
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy. Those class prejudices, those ingrained societal structures, they don't just disappear.
Right. And it's reflected in the very language that's used to describe where they end up.
Yes.
Right. Mickey, raised in poverty, lives on the estate.
Yeah.
Edward, raised in privilege, grows up in that big house on the hill.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
This speaks volumes.
It speaks volumes about how our environment shapes
Yes,
our perceptions, our opportunities.
totally.
And this brings us, I think, to the heart of the play, the twins themselves.
Okay.
because their contrasting experiences become this lens through which Russell examines the complexities of social class.
Yeah, it's like we're watching this giant social experiment play out.
Yes.
Right before our very eyes, their lives become a study in how
Yes.
that starting point can have such a profound impact on our trajectory.
Absolutely.
Like, for instance, we see how middle-class children like Edward often had a clear advantage when it came to education.
Yeah, their families could afford to live in catchment areas for good schools.
Right.
Sometimes even sending them to private institutions, which gave them that direct pathway
Of course.
to university, to those coveted, high-paying jobs.
It's all laid out for them.
Yeah, Edward's path, going to a private boarding school,
Yeah.
the expectation of Oxbridge, and then eventually landing this really prestigious job.
It's like he doesn't even have to try.
And a lot of that is down to the privilege that he was afforded from the start.
Yeah, it's like his destiny was almost preordained,
Yeah.
right, by his social standing, whereas working class children often had no choice but to contribute to the family income right
Yeah.
after school, even if they were bright and capable.
Absolutely.
University was a distant dream.
And that's exactly what we see with Mickey.
Right.
He attends the local state school.
Yeah.
The expectation is to find work as soon as possible, not to pursue higher education.
Right.
And he ends up in this dead-end job, which he loses during the recession.
Right.
And then what does he have to fall back on? No qualifications.
It's bleak.
Very few options. It's
Yeah.
a bleak picture.
It's heartbreaking because you see how his opportunities are limited by his circumstances.
Yeah.
Whereas Edward, despite his mistakes, always seems to land on his feet.
Always seems to land on his feet. And I think the play really doesn't shy away from depicting the devastating impact
No.
of that 1970s recession on those who are already struggling.
Yeah, it's this harsh reminder that economic downturns rarely impact everyone equally.
Exactly.
Right? While Mickey's out there trying to survive, barely scraping by,
Yeah.
the Lyons family seems almost impervious
Yes.
to the recession's effects.
That's such a deliberate contrast that Russell draws.
Yeah.
The Lyons have these diversified income streams, and they've got this safety net that the Johnstones simply don't possess.
Right.
And even though Mr. Lyons lays off workers from his factory, his family remains financially secure.
It just underscores those power dynamics at play, right?
Yeah.
The disparity between those who have and those who have not.
Absolutely.
And this theme of power or lack thereof extends to the play's exploration of gender roles as well.
Yes.
Which were incredibly restrictive for women during that era.
Yes, very much so. And I think we see how Mrs. Lyons, despite her wealth and her social standing,
Yeah.
is essentially powerless in a lot of ways.
Yes.
She can't make independent decisions, even when it comes to something as simple as,
Right.
buying a necklace.
It's heartbreaking.
She needs her husband's approval. She needs his money.
Yeah.
And her inability to have children further emphasizes, I think, the societal limitations placed on her.
It's tragic because you can sense her intelligence,
Yes.
your capabilities, but she's trapped.
Yes, she's trapped within this gilded cage
Exactly.
of her own making.
And then there's Linda.
And then there's Linda.
She starts off as this free spirit, almost rebelling against these expectations.
Yeah.
But as the play unfolds, she finds herself bound by those same societal constraints.
Right.
Feeling trapped in this role of wife and mother.
Yeah, and I think Linda's story really highlights the complexities of female identity during that time.
Yeah.
It wasn't always a clear-cut case of oppression or liberation.
Right.
It was about navigating a society that had very defined expectations of what it meant to be
Yeah.
a woman,
Right.
a wife,
Right.
a mother. And as the twins grow up,
Yeah.
their paths diverge,
Right, dear.
mirroring the widening gulf between their social classes.
Yes.
That childhood bond that they shared
Mhm.
becomes
Mhm.
strained by their increasingly different realities.
And you see how Mickey becomes resentful of Edward's seemingly effortless life. Meanwhile, Edward, blinded by his own privilege,
Right.
struggles to comprehend the constant financial worries that plague Mickey's existence.
Right.
It's like they're living in two separate universes despite being tethered by blood.
And it's so interesting how that power dynamic shifts as they grow older.
Okay.
So as children, it's Mickey who holds the power.
Yeah?
He's the leader. He's the one that Edward looks up to and emulates.
Oh, that's interesting.
But as adults, the roles are reversed.
Wow.
Edward, with his wealth and his influence,
Yeah.
becomes the dominant figure in their relationship, even if unintentionally.
It's almost like their social positions are dictating
Yes,
the terms of their interactions.
exactly.
But even amidst all the social commentary and the harsh realities,
Yeah.
Blood Brothers make sure to remind us that these characters are still young. They're capable of finding moments of joy and freedom,
Yes,
even if fleeting.
absolutely. Act 2 introduces us to the burgeoning youth culture of the 1960s.
Okay.
So we see Mickey and Linda and Edward at the rifle range. They go to the beach.
It's like a little glimpse of normalcy.
Exactly.
Right.
And it kind of allows the audience to remember that amidst all of this darkness,
Right.
these characters are still young. They're still capable of experiencing joy.
Yeah.
And that makes the play's tragic end
Right.
all the more heart-wrenching because we've witnessed those glimpses of what could have been.
Of what they ultimately lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What they ultimately lose.
And speaking of highlighting those contrasts and those almost larger-than-life elements,
Yeah.
Russell's not afraid to use those theatrical flourishes to really drive his point home.
He's not, no.
I'm thinking about the narrator, those almost Brechtian moments that break the fourth wall.
Absolutely.
Oh,
The narrator's more than just a storyteller.
Yeah.
Right? He's like a commentator,
yeah.
a guide, constantly reminding us that we're bearing witness to something bigger than ourselves.
Mm.
He launches into these really kind of chilling verses,
Hmm.
often addressing the audience directly.
Right.
And it's like he's drawing us into these moral dilemmas at the heart of the play.
It's like, don't just sit there and watch this.
Yeah.
Think about it. Whose side are you on?
Exactly.
What would you have done?
What would you have done?
And it creates this incredible sense of unease, like we're implicated in the events unfolding on stage.
I think that's exactly the point.
Right?
He wants us to feel implicated in this.
Yeah.
And his language, too. It's interesting how he shifts between this very formal prose and then that thick Liverpudlian dialect.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost like it reinforces this role as an observer
Okay.
who exists outside of that traditional social hierarchy.
Interesting.
He's a detached chronicler of these intertwined destinies,
Mm-hmm.
but he also hints at the presence of these darker forces at play.
Right. Those constant allusions to the devil, that sense of impending doom.
Yeah.
It's like a shadow hanging over these characters, reminding us that their choices have consequences.
Yes, and some of those consequences are beyond their control.
Right.
And I think that all feeds back into that central theme of fate versus free will.
Of course.
Because how much agency do these characters really have?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Given the circumstances they're born into.
It's that classic question.
Exactly. And structurally, the play plays with that idea, too.
Yeah.
Right from the outset, we know the ending.
We do.
We see that tragic ending right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the story unfolds, almost like a Greek tragedy.
It's true.
And there's this brilliant use of dramatic irony.
Yeah, it's like we're watching a car crash in slow motion,
Yes.
knowing the devastating outcome, but we're powerless to stop it.
Yes.
And that tension just builds and builds and builds.
With every scene, every choice that they make.
Right.
Yeah, and it drives home this idea of inevitability.
Yeah.
Like these events are inescapable.
Oh.
And that's what makes it so compelling to watch.
It's so tragic, but you can't look away.
Exactly. And I think Russell very deliberately crafts this experience for the audience.
Okay.
He's not just telling a story.
It's visceral.
It's visceral.
Mm-hmm.
He's blending this realism
Yeah.
with these larger-than-life theatrical flourishes.
And the music is a huge part of that. It's not just there for entertainment, right?
No, absolutely not.
It adds these layers of meaning. It drives the narrative forward, and it gives us this glimpse
Yes.
into the characters' inner lives.
It is.
Like, take a song like Miss Jones, right?
Yeah.
It covers years in the span of a few minutes.
It does. It pushes us through time
Right. It's so clever.
so effectively.
And then you have songs like Long Sunday Afternoon, which captures that bittersweet longing for connection.
Yes, that yearning for what they've lost.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. It's really beautifully done.
And then those really powerful ballads like Easy Terms and Tell Me It's Not True.
Oh, they're just gut-wrenching, aren't they?
Oh, they're incredible.
He has such a way with lyrics.
He does.
He really captures the human experience
Yeah.
with such precision and empathy.
And the way he uses the music within the context of the play.
Yeah.
Right. It's creating atmosphere. It's heightening the tension.
Underscoring those really pivotal moments.
Speaking of pivotal moments, let's talk about how this world is brought to life on stage.
Okay.
Because I'm fascinated by this interplay between realism and theatricality,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to the set design.
So typically, Blood Brothers is performed on a proscenium arch stage,
Okay.
which I think is very deliberate because it creates that clear division
Right.
between the audience and the performers. We're peering into their world through this invisible fourth wall.
But within that traditional setup, he employs some really clever techniques.
He does.
Like, he suggests using a composite set where multiple locations are shown simultaneously,
Yeah.
which is such a great way to highlight the interconnectedness
Yes.
of the characters' lives.
Exactly.
Right, how their choices ripple outward and impact everyone around them.
I think visually it's really effective as well.
Totally.
Because it allows for those seamless transitions between scenes.
It keeps the momentum going.
Keeps the momentum going. Yeah, exactly.
Keeps the audience engaged.
Yeah.
I also love how he positions the two families' homes on stage.
Yes.
Right? So the Johnstones and the Lyanceys houses are usually the central set pieces,
They are.
with the action often taking place in this kind of communal ground between them.
Which again emphasizes that tension,
It's so symbolic.
that invisible barrier that separates their worlds.
And even though the stage directions don't dictate every single detail,
Right.
he gives us these really vivid descriptions of each house,
He does.
really highlighting that stark contrast between their environments.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, so the Johnstones' house is on this typical terraced street.
Yeah.
He describes it as having soot-blackened brick walls and peeling paint.
Yeah.
It just speaks to the poverty,
It
the
sure does.
hardship of their existence.
Yeah, it's a world of cramped spaces,
Yeah.
limited options.
It's like the walls are closing in on them.
Yeah, very much so.
Whereas the Lyance's house, which is in this more affluent area near a park,
Yeah, near the park, yeah.
it's described as having this wide bay window and this shiny front door with this silver knocker.
Everything is bright and polished.
It just embodies their wealth and their social standing.
Yeah, and it's such a simple visual contrast, but it speaks volumes.
And then when the Johnstones moved to Skelmersdale,
Yeah,
their new house is described as having this bright yellow door.
right. It's interesting, isn't it?
It's such a subtle detail.
It is.
But that burst of color,
Yeah.
it feels hopeful, like a symbol of new beginnings.
Yeah, I think that's deliberate.
Yeah.
He wants us to believe that even in this bleak reality,
Right.
there's still room for optimism, for dreams of a better future.
Right. And it's those little glimmers of hope that
Mhm.
make the inevitable tragedy even more poignant.
Exactly, exactly.
And I like how he uses those oversized scenery pieces,
Yeah.
like those tall trucks with brick walls,
Yes.
to create a sense of claustrophobia,
Being trapped.
being trapped within these circumstances beyond your control.
Exactly. And I think it's a really powerful visual metaphor
Right.
for the limitations imposed upon these characters by their social class.
And even though the play doesn't rely heavily on props,
Well,
the few that are used are so carefully chosen
Go
to
down.
convey information about the characters and their social standing.
absolutely.
You've got that contrast between the velvet armchair and the bookshelf overflowing with hardback books
Yeah.
in the Lyons' house, suggesting their wealth and their intellectual pursuits
Right.
versus like the sparse furnishings of the Johnstones' home,
Yes.
reflecting their hand-to-mouth existence.
It's all about those visual cues
It is.
that speak volumes.
And the lighting, we can't forget of that lighting.
Well, the lighting is crucial.
It seems like he uses light and shadow to incredible effect.
He uses it to shift the mood, highlight key moments,
Yeah.
even foreshadow events to come.
It's like he's playing with light and dark,
He is.
right? Both literally and figuratively.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me more about how he does that.
Well, he'll use cool tones like blues and purples
Mhm.
to create that kind of nighttime atmosphere,
Right.
like that scene in the chip shop at the beginning.
Okay.
Whereas warmer tones like yellows and oranges might signify daytime
Okay.
and create a more kind of vibrant, energetic feel, like during that beach scene.
I see. So it's like setting the tone.
Setting the tone, exactly.
And then those floodlights,
Yeah.
washing the stage with sunshine when the characters are outdoors.
Yeah, it creates that sense of freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah, like anything is possible.
Exactly. And then conversely, when he dims the lights,
Yeah.
or when a character is isolated in a single spotlight,
Yeah.
it heightens that emotional intensity
Yeah.
and creates this sense of vulnerability.
Oh, it's like their world is closing in.
Yeah, or even of impending doom.
Right. Like something bad is about to happen.
He's very clever with that.
And he'll use that profile spotlight
Yes.
to draw attention to specific objects or actions
Yes.
that might seem insignificant at the time, but later on
Sure.
take on this whole other meaning. It's like
Yeah.
he's saying, pay attention to this.
Pay attention. This will be important later.
This will come back.
Yes,
And the way he uses light symbolically is so powerful.
it is.
Like in Act 1, when Mrs. Johnstone is standing over Edward's cot
Yeah.
and the light slowly fades between them,
It's so effective.
it visually represents their separation.
Yeah.
Even though they're physically in the same space,
Yes.
that fading light is like this chasm growing between them.
It's beautifully done.
And then at the other end of the emotional spectrum, you've got those red gels
Yes.
flooding the stage with this ominous light,
Yeah.
foreshadowing the violence to come.
Foreshadowing the bloodshed. Yeah.
It's chilling.
It's very effective.
It's like a visual warning that things are about to take a dark turn.
Yeah. And I think for Mickey as well, in his prison cell,
Okay.
as his hope dwindles,
Yeah.
they talk about the lighting around him becoming dimmer and dimmer.
Wow.
And it symbolizes his descent into despair.
It's subtle, but it's so powerful.
It is. It's so powerful.
Right. Just that manipulation of light can completely transform
Absolutely.
the mood and the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And while lighting kind of sets the mood and the tone,
Yeah.
he also uses a variety of technical devices to create these dynamic transitions
He does.
and these memorable moments.
Yes.
I was particularly intrigued by the mention of trucks being wheeled onto the stage
Yes.
for quick scene changes.
Yes. It's a very practical solution.
Yeah,
But it allows for that fluidity.
right.
It keeps the action moving.
Keeps the audience engaged.
Just exactly.
And they might also use a fly system
Yeah.
to quickly lift scenery on and off.
On and off. Yeah, absolutely.
Or even a revolving stage for those more elaborate set changes.
Yeah.
And then there's the use of projections,
Oh, the projections are fantastic.
which opens up a whole world of
Here
possibilities.
they do.
Right. Imagine projecting images onto a backdrop.
Yeah.
You can instantly transport the audience
To different locations.
to different locations without having to rely on these bulky set pieces.
It's really effective and it's cost effective as well.
Right. It's like this really clever use of technology
It is.
to enhance the storytelling.
To enhance the storytelling, yeah.
And you can't underestimate the power of sound in Blood Brothers.
Oh, the sound is amazing.
From what I'm seeing, they use sound design to create atmosphere,
Yeah.
build tension, even give us access to the characters' inner thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a bit about how that works.
Well, pre-recorded soundscapes, I think, play a huge role in establishing setting and creating a sense of realism for the audience.
Okay.
So you might have the sounds of bustling city life,
Right.
children playing traffic whizzing by to transport us to the heart of Liverpool.
It's like you're right there. Exactly.
You're immersed in that environment.
And then in contrast to that, you might have the gentle chirping of birds,
Right.
rustling leaves that evoke the tranquility of Skelmersdale.
Oh, I see.
So it's those subtle differences in the soundscape
Right.
that really help to transport the audience.
And then there's that non-diegetic sound.
Yeah. Yeah. The sound that the characters can't hear,
But we hear it.
but we hear it. Yeah.
And it just adds these layers of meaning and emotion.
Yeah. It might be this really melancholic melody
Right.
that underscores a moment of loss,
Okay.
or a sudden burst of dissonant music that reflects a character's inner turmoil.
Oh, it's like we're given access to these unspoken thoughts and emotions.
Exactly. And it creates, I think, a much deeper understanding of what's happening beneath the surface.
Totally.
That's happening beneath the surface, right? It's giving us a window into their souls.
It is.
And Russell uses sound to foreshadow events, to build suspense, even to symbolize those larger themes of fate and inevitability.
He dies.
Like that heartbeat sound that they mentioned
Yeah.
that increases in volume before the twins are born.
It's like this ticking clock, isn't it?
Yeah.
This constant reminder of the pact that Mrs. Johnstone has made
Yeah.
and the price that she'll ultimately pay.
And the audience picks up on it too, right? Even if it's subconscious.
Yeah, if you think.
It's like this undercurrent of tension
Exactly.
that's always there.
Yeah.
And then you have those more literal sound effects.
Yes.
Like the amplified police sirens
Yes.
that accompany Sammy's entrance in Act 2.
Which is a really clever way of hinting at
Right. It's like, uh-oh.
his future fate.
This guy means trouble.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly.
It's subtle, but it's so effective.
It's so effective.
Those little details add so much depth.
They do.
It's like every sound has a purpose.
Every sound has a purpose.
Whether it's creating a sense of place or heightening those emotional stakes.
Or giving us that glimpse into the character's psyches.
Yeah, or foreshadowing doom.
Foreshadowing doom, yes.
And just as sound can be used subtly, it can also be used to create these incredibly jarring and visceral moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think really mirrors the character's own descent
Yes.
into chaos.
It does.
Right? Like their world is unraveling.
Yeah,
And the sound design reflects that.
it does.
They talk about using microphones and sound effects to distort voices.
Yeah.
Right? To create this sense of overwhelming confusion and disorientation. Like those children's voices
Yeah.
chanting "Mad Woman" at Mrs. Lyons.
Right.
But their words are amplified, distorted, echoing around the theater.
It would be chilling.
It's chilling. And it reflects her fracturing psyche, doesn't it? As she starts to descend into despair.
It's like we're in her head
Yes.
and things are getting messy.
Exactly.
And then those distorted police pronouncements after Mickey's shooting.
Yeah.
It's not just about hearing the words.
No.
It's about feeling the chaos and the tragedy of that moment.
The chaos and the tragedy of that moment, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Russell understands the power of sound to really create this visceral impact.
It does. It stays with you
It stays with you
long after you've left the theater.
long after the curtain has fallen.
And speaking of leaving a lasting impression, the costumes in Blood Brothers seem just as carefully considered as the set and the lighting.
Absolutely. They're not just about what looks good.
Yeah.
They're about telling a story.
It's another opportunity to convey information about these characters.
Revealing character.
You know, social standing, even their inner lives.
Absolutely.
And in a play where social class is such a dominant theme,
Yeah.
those visual cues become even more important.
I do. Yeah,
Because clothing can be such a powerful indicator
It can.
of our place in the world.
You can learn so much about a character just by looking at what they're wearing.
Right.
Their clothes become this reflection of their economic status, their aspirations, their place in the world.
Exactly. And in a play like Blood Brothers, where social class is so central to the narrative.
The characters' costumes become this kind of visual shorthand for their backgrounds and their opportunities.
Right. Like Mickey might be stuck in hand-me-downs, right?
Yes.
His clothes reflecting the wear and tear of a life lived on the margins.
Yeah.
Whereas Edward's attire kind of evolves alongside his social ascent.
Absolutely.
So maybe like a school uniform that just screams privilege,
Yes.
followed by these sharp suits that exude success.
And those subtle details that tell a story without uttering a word.
They speak volumes.
They do.
And we see it with the other characters too, right? Mrs. Johnstone in her simple frocks and apron.
Yeah.
She embodies that working class mother struggling to keep her family afloat.
Absolutely.
Whereas Miss Jones might be in those crisp professional outfits,
Yeah.
signifying her aspiration for upward mobility.
Her desire for something more.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how those sartorial choices reflect their dreams, their limitations, their place within that really rigid social hierarchy.
It's all there on the surface, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like you can read their life story just by looking at them.
Exactly.
And Linda's costumes.
Yes.
They seem to chart her own journey of self-discovery, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She starts off as this really vibrant young woman.
Yeah.
So maybe she's wearing bright colors, playful silhouettes that reflect her kind of rebellious streak.
Right.
But as she grapples with these societal expectations,
Right.
motherhood, and her own desires,
Yeah.
her clothing might become more subdued,
Right.
more restrained.
It's like her outward appearance is mirroring this internal struggle.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
It's so clever.
It is.
And then there's Mrs. Lyons.
Mrs. Lyons, yeah.
Her costumes kind of evolving alongside her growing instability.
Yes. So early on, it might be those perfectly tailored suits,
Right.
the expensive jewelry, projecting this image of control of someone who has it all together.
She's put together.
But as her anxieties grow,
Yeah.
as her desperation grows, maybe her clothes become more disheveled.
Oh, wow.
The colors more jarring, reflecting that inner turmoil.
It's like her carefully constructed facade starts to crumble.
Starts to crumble. Exactly.
And I love that Russell even suggests using makeup to accentuate Mrs. Johnstone's hardship.
Yes.
Like to make her appear older than her years.
Yeah, it's a visual representation of the toll that poverty and that relentless struggle has taken on her.
Wow. It's those little details.
It is.
That can really make a production come alive.
Absolutely. And I think it's a testament to Russell's understanding that every single detail,
Right.
no matter how small, contributes to the overall impact of this play.
Yeah. He's not leaving anything to chance.
Exactly.
Exactly.
He's creating a world that feels real and lived in.
And ultimately deeply affecting.
Deeply affecting.
And I think that's what makes Blood Brothers so much more than just a play,
Yeah.
right? It's an experience.
It's an experience.
It's like a conversation starter.
Yeah, it throws a spotlight on these really uncomfortable truths about social inequality, about fate, about the human condition.
It makes you wonder, right?
It does.
Does where we start in life inevitably determine where we end up?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And I don't think Blood Brothers offers any easy answer.
No.
It presents this complex web of social realities and personal choices
Right.
and tragic circumstances, and it's really inviting the audience to grapple with those questions.
It's thought-provoking.
It is thought-provoking.
It stays with you.
It stays with you.
Long after you've seen it.
Long after the curtain has fallen.
It's a story that stays with you that prompts reflection.
Reflection,
There's
yeah, and
something-
maybe even a little bit of soul-searching.
Yeah, and I think that's the power of great art, isn't it?
It is.
It holds a mirror up to society, to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths and re-examine our own beliefs.
And I think Blood Brothers doesn't shy away from the darkness,
No, it doesn't.
but it also reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for love and loss,
Yeah.
and those fleeting moments of joy that make life worth living.
It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds,
Yeah.
there's always hope.
Always hope.
There's always the possibility for change, for connection,
Yeah.
for those sparks of humanity that bind us together.
And isn't that a thought worth holding on to?
It is. And on that note, I think we've done our deep dive on Blood Brothers for today.
I think so.
Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your insights.
It's been a pleasure as always.
Until next time.